Hi, this is Bob Woodfin, Bob Woodfin Photography and Rowlett Texas Photography Club. Today we're going to talk about dodging and burning. Now, dodging and burning is where you go in and lighten lighter areas and darken dark areas, and the idea is to bring out contrast in your image. Now, a lot of people will use dodging and burning to go in and just lighten some darker areas or darken some light areas, and I don't really consider that dodging and burning, but I guess it could be. If you think about back in the film days where they wanted to lighten certain areas, that's kind of how they would do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 3 different methods, and I'm going to talk about why you dodge and burn. I'm going to talk about the different methods, and I'm going to show you how I go in and do some dodging and burning. Now, we're not going to talk about the Photoshop tool that is provided. I don't use that. I don't know a lot of photographers that do use it, but it doesn't mean it's not a powerful tool. If you use it, that's wonderful. It will not be covered in this video. There are probably 10 different methods. If you can think about how you can lighten an exposure or darken an exposure, you can probably use that method for dodging and burning. So we're just going to talk about 3 different ones, 3 different ones that I think are pretty easy to use and pretty powerful. And with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. Now, dodging and burning, as I said, the way I use it is to go in and add contrast, add tonal contrast to your image. So what we would go into an image like this, and on this rock here in the middle, I'm going to lighten this area right here, and then I'm going to darken some of the areas around it to make that really pop out so that you don't miss it, so that it becomes a point of interest. Same with these rocks in the background, same with this rock and this big rock in the foreground, and even the trees back in the background here. So let's go ahead and get started. And the first method that we're going to use is one, if you are a Flern fan or an Aaron Nace fan, then you probably are aware of this method or aware of his tactics. He's a great guy, great teacher, and if you were involved in his 30 days of Photoshop this past January 2020, then you probably saw him perform this method or show you how he does his dodging and burning. So it's a very simple way, and I think if you're a beginner to Photoshop and a beginner to dodging and burning, it's a very easy way to get around and understand how to do it. So what he does is, you may remember that the first of last year, when we first kind of got started with these workshops, we talked about the adjustment layers. One of those was the curves adjustment layer. Aaron uses the curves adjustment layer for his dodging and burning. So at the top of the stack, if you go down here to your icon for adding adjustment layers and just select curves, we're going to add at the top of the stack a curves adjustment layer, and then we're going to add a second one by doing a Command J, or just doing it excuse me, Control or Command J, or just selecting it again and doing the same thing over. I'm just going to do a Command J to add another one. And what we're going to do, we're going to rename this burn, and we're going to come down here and rename this one dodge. You can probably see where we're going with this. And then we're going to come over here to the curve, and if you remember, when you grab the curve and you push it up, everything gets a lot lighter. Notice in the image there where things have gotten a lot lighter. If you pull it down, things get a lot darker. So basically that's what we're going to use in this in these 2 layers. So for a dodge, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this up a little bit. Let me zoom in here so you can see. And we're going to go up about halfway up this little line here on this box. And then you'll notice that's 164. That doesn't really mean anything. It just gives you an idea of where you are compared to me when you're doing this on your own. Then we're going to come up here to burn, and we're going to push it down, and again it's going to be about halfway down here. Notice how everything's getting darker, and if we look in here, then you'll notice that it's about halfway down on this box here, or about 97, something like that. So now sorry about that. Now we have the setup for these 2. The only problem is that it's visualizing everything. So what we want to do is we want to hide these because you want to paint them in individually. So we're going to come in here within the mask, make sure that you're clicked on the mask, and you want to fill it with black, or you want to invert it. So there's a couple ways to do that. You can either just paint everything black, or you can come into your edit, fill, and select black on your contents here and just say OK, and it fills it with black so that it hides the burn effect that we put in. Then you do the same thing down here, but the easier way to do it is just do an invert, and you can either do a well, it's not a selection, so you would either do you could do a Command or Control I that inverts it. So now we're back to where we started. So now let's go in and begin to dodge. So if you're going to reveal what the dodge curves layer is, you need to paint with white. So what we're going to do is come in here with our brush and paint. Notice over here that on the toolbar, if I zoom in here, that I have selected white, and then up here at the top I'm using an opacity of 20. Now you can start with whatever opacity you want because you can always back it off. This is just a mask. You can paint back over it with black if you've gone too far, or you can change the opacity over here of the layer. So just there's lots of flexibility. That's why this is such an easy method. But we're going to go with black. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger here, and we're just going to kind of paint in here, and you can see how it turns. It's beginning to get a little white there. I always lose my cursor here. And up along here, and you're just going to want to paint along the areas where you want to show that contrast, because I'm going to come back with shadows and add in a little bit here in these areas next to it. So then in this rock here in the middle, we're going to paint just like right in here to kind of bring out that highlight a little bit more. And then these rocks in the foreground, these little rocks, we'll also paint them too. So I'm going to go along here, and I'm going to do this pretty quickly. It's going to be a little sloppy because I'm trying to get through this video, but basically you just need to come in here and add some punch to these highlights, and then we'll come back a little later. Now you can zoom in here with your Command or Control plus on your keypad and just continue painting along here. And we want to be sure and just get the highlights here, and then we'll come along later and get the shadows. So again, pretty quickly here, these rocks up here, and so on. And up here, already did this a little bit, but I'll do it again. And even the trees, you want to make these highlights pop out a little bit. So just kind of paint over them. And if I took the time, I would go down the tree trunks as well. I'm not going to take the time to do that because it would be real meticulous, but it would make those tree trunks really pop out. So if you remember, if you do click, shift, click again, shift, click again, it draws straight lines. So you could do that and then come along the edge there and paint it black to make it really pop. So we're going to come in here again, paint along in here. The good thing about this is that on this layer you can't really make the mistake of painting black instead of white, because you're just revealing what the layer is. And in this case, the layer is a curve that is lightening things. So come in here and you can notice here that this was on a photography trip, a workshop in Maine, and these are some of my fellow photography students. I liked, those of you that have been with me on any kind of an excursion, a walk or anything with our club, know I like to go off by myself. So it's not that I'm trying to be antisocial, I just don't want to be influenced by anybody else's photography. I have my own ideas of what I want to do. Okay, so that's kind of gone around pretty quickly, and if you look over here to the right toolbar, you can see everything that I've done. And then now we're going to do the same thing with burning. Okay, so click up here, and now the idea is to come in here and add a little shadow. And again, you can change the opacity if necessary, if you want to. So just kind of make that a little dark there, that dark. Burn this down a little bit right here, a little bit right there. Come over here. And then again, the idea is to make it pop out. And you really, most of the time, it's more of the highlights that you're bumping up. And like right in here, I want to make that a little darker so that that makes that pop. And let's zoom in here. And we'll get this like that. Right here. And if your dark isn't dark enough, like I say, you can always go back into your curve and pull it down a little bit more to make your shadows a little darker if you need to. And along in here, I'm not really going to do a whole lot because it was really more lightening up a little bit. But in the trees, I am going to kind of go around these and try to darken the areas around where the highlights are, especially where they're fairly bright, because I want them to really jump out. And I may want to go back in and lighten them a little bit more. But again, this is just a demonstration. It's not what I would probably be happy with in the end, but to kind of show you the method and the tools to get it done. So you've got these areas here. Probably doesn't look like I'm really doing anything, but you'll notice here in a minute whenever we do the turning it on and off what a difference it's made. Okay. All right, that's good enough to give you an idea. So now, if you come back over here to, you can see the different areas where I burned in. So this gives you an idea. It didn't look like I was doing anything, but it really is making a difference there. So now if we take these two and put them in a group and turn the group off and on, you can see, if you look around, the different places in the image where I've made a difference. And to me, this was just a small adjustment. I would probably get into it a little bit more if I were doing this for a final image, but just this little adjustment I think makes a big difference, turning it on and off. So anyway, that is the Flern method, or the Aranese method. Very easy to understand, very easy to use, and it may be one you want to start with until you get kind of familiar, a little bit more familiar with Photoshop. What we're going to do now is I'm going to go to another image. This is another one of the same place. Let's take a look up here and grab this one. This one is on the same workshop, but this one can be adjusted quite a bit. So what I would do here is we're going to use a method that I learned when I was on a Texas school with Richard Sturdivant back in 2016, and I used this for like 3 years because it's so easy to use, and it's almost as easy as the last one that we used. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, it seems like, when you're thinking about what you're doing, but it really is simple and easy. So what we're going to do is, it uses the history panel, and the history panel is something that we haven't talked about very much yet, but I'm going to kind of go over just briefly the idea of how the history panel works. And if you notice the history panel, as I was clicking a moment ago when I was talking, there were several steps in here. That's because I was doing this yesterday just to make sure that I knew what I was doing. But it keeps every history state of anything that you do. If I come in here with the brush and I just start painting or whatever, notice that it's got two brush because I was painting with the brush and painting and painting and painting. You can see that I've really did a good job there. And then if I wanted to go back to that another history state, I wanted to go back and remove those, I can just click up here, and now you can notice that whatever I did over here is no longer here. If I go back down here to that, history is back here. So this is just where you can go back and forth in history. And basically if you do your Command or Control Z, that's what it does. It takes you back. See how, notice how it's going up and down there. So that's what history does. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to use the history brush, and we're going to paint in a history state. Now the way this works with the history brush is if I had a long list of history states here and I noticed something that I didn't like and I wanted to go back, but only for a certain section of my image, but I could go in here and click in this box. That's what this is for. And notice the symbol is just like the symbol over here, which is the history brush. If I go over here, you can see over here in the toolbar, the symbol is the same thing as when I click over here. That's because it's saying that I want to use the history brush at this point in this history state. So that history state is basically right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new layer. We're going to do a duplicate of this layer. If you had a bunch of layers here already, you would want to do a consolidated layer, which is the Command or Control on a PC, Option or Alt on a PC, Shift E. You press all those at the same time and you get a consolidated layer at the top. So I call that the clone stamp layer, but that's not really what it's called, but that's always what pops in my mind when I think about it. But the idea is that you want a clean layer that you can paint on. In this instance, we're on the very first layer, so I'm just going to do a duplicate. So do a Command J or Control J to duplicate this layer. And I'm going to change the name and call it Dodge and Burn. Okay? Now on this layer, since I'm here in the history state, I'm going to say I want to be painting at the current history state. Now it doesn't seem to make sense because it's not history, it's current. But what you're going to be doing is going to the history brush and painting with multiply for burn and screen for dodge. And what that means is it's actually painting this color. We're going to paint black for multiply for burn and screen on white for dodge. And that means that it's just going to be painting that on this one history state, so painting it on itself. It's kind of hard to understand, but the idea, you don't really have to understand, you just have to know the steps to do it. So we've created a dodge and burn layer, we've selected a history state, we selected a history brush, and now we're going to come in here and do screen, and we're going to change the color to white, and then I can come in here and paint for the highlights. It's at 20. I normally go at 10, but sometimes it's you may want to go a little harder. But we're going to start with 10, and I'm just going to paint over some areas here. And you'll notice that it's lightening it up pretty good here. So we can come in here and just lighten these up. Like I said, get this side right here, this one. And then we have all this grass. This was at Bar Harbor, Maine, and this was on one of the beaches. And it was a foggy morning, and it was really kind of interesting that morning. We wanted to have a picture of the lighthouse, but the lighthouse was hidden in the fog. We finally got enough break in the fog to get the lighthouse, which is going to be the next image that we're going to work on. But in the meantime, I saw all this. I don't know what this grass is, but it's some kind of seagrass, and it's all around these rocks and all on the shore. So I want to get this picture. So we're going to come in here and just kind of get this highlight along this edge, because I'm going to darken that edge a little bit. Come in here, right here, and I'm spending a little bit more time here than I did on the last image, but I need to speed it up here so we can get through it. But you can see, especially on the rocks, when you have rocks in your image like this, and whether it's a lake or a in this case a beach, you have a lot of contrast there, and you can do a lot of dodging and burning to really bring out the texture. And I'm not going to be doing a real great job here because I'm trying to get through it, but you kind of see what I'm doing, getting these highlights, and then we'll come along in a second and do the burning. I'm not even going to do the trees. I would normally do the trees a little bit here. I'm going to lighten up this area just a little bit right there. Okay, so now I'm going to change it to black, and I'm going to go to multiply. And then we're going to come in here, and all these areas where I have a little bit of shadow along with these highlights, I'm going to try to bring out the shadow there. So one of the things that is not as good with this method as the other method is that it's not on a mask, and if you make a mistake and you darken something too dark, or you've got something that you shouldn't have, you thought you were painting with screen and you're actually painting with multiply, the problem is that you really can't go back and change it. What you have to do is add a mask and try to kind of mask it off, and then go in and try to make the adjustment. So it's not as user-friendly as far as that's concerned, as far as if you make mistakes. So you have to keep that in mind. But it's a pretty effective method, and I didn't really look into any other methods whenever I learned this one, and it was one that he was showing us and it seemed to work, so I didn't even question it. I just went ahead and did it. And yes, I made mistakes along the way. I paid the price, but it worked out pretty good for me. Okay, so we have this, and I think I'm about done with this. I mean, I really need to go on if I really wanted to make this a compelling image. But if we turn it off and turn it back on, look at the difference. Big difference in this image. And it really added quite a bit of highlights and shadows contrast. So that is one method to another method, using the history brush. And like I said, I used this for probably 3 years before I moved on to the method I'm using now, which is the one we're going to talk about next. So let's go over here. Here's the lighthouse, and it's really not a lighthouse. It's what they call it, I forgot what they call it, lamp house or something. I can't remember, but it's not a lighthouse because it's not designed to do the things that a lighthouse is designed to do. The objective in this image, really, and I didn't realize it at the time, but there's a little pool of water down here in front in the foreground that is reflecting the light, and the idea was to get the shot with the reflection. And I was kind of spaced out when I was doing this, I guess, but I think I got a pretty good image anyway. I like it pretty well. So the next method is one that I'm using today, and it's a method that I think a lot of photographers are using, a lot of retouchers are using. And what you do is you add a blank layer, and then you fill that blank layer with 50% gray. And to do that, you can go to Edit, Fill, and change this and say 50% gray. Or you can just do Shift Delete or Shift Backspace, and you get the same dialog box, and change this to say 50% gray. And it fills it with 50% gray like this. and then you change the blending mode. And by the way, if you can't see, we're over here 50% gray. We're going to change the blending mode down here to be soft light. Now you can use any one of these, but soft light is the one that's it's the one that's probably the softest. It's not one that really gives it so much impact when you're painting in. Sometimes if you use overlay or hard light or something like that, when you paint your dodging and burning, it will actually change the colors a little bit, and we really don't want that. So we're going to use soft light. So it's going to change it to soft light, and when I do that, your image comes back. If you remember that in blending modes, we look over here, you have your darken and you have your lighten modes, then you have what I call the contrast modes. Your darkens the lighter areas below, and it adds, these are blending with the layer below it, so it takes the image and it darkens based on the lighter pixels in the layer below. This one lightens based on the darker pixels in the image below, and then contrast does both, and it makes midtones invisible, which is why 50% gray turns invisible whenever you select one of these blending modes. And the reason we're doing this is because it allows us to now come in here and paint on this blank layer, and we can see what we're doing over here. So now the good thing about this is that we can use a regular brush, and we're going to paint. We're going to paint with soft light, and we're going to paint with white for the particular highlights, and we'll paint with black for the shadows. So if we come in here with our brush and you notice that we're at 20%, then you can come in here with white and begin to paint where your highlights are. And 20% may not be enough in some instances, but it's a good start. You don't want to go with 100%. In fact, I'm going to go to 30% here. 100% is going to be too strong. You can always come over here and lower the opacity though if you get too strong. So with this, we'll come in here and hit some of these highlights, and remember, I'm looking for places where I'm going to have dark areas around it that I can darken to really bring out the contrast. You got some really nice highlights here on top of this black rock. We're going to hit that pretty good. Come down here, a little bit right there. And if you have a pressure sensitive, or if you want to use the flow, then you can also control how much you're using. If you remember, the flow is, if you push across, it's like a brush. If you push across once, it's going to lay down a certain effect. So if you go 20% on the flow, it's going to lay down 20%. Then if you keep it down and press back, it's going to do another 20%, and then back and forth. It adds every time. Where opacity is, if you do that, it only adds up to 20% until you let up with the brush. So it's kind of hard to get used to if you're not used to using flow, but once you get used to using it, it's pretty cool. So again, we're just going to come in here, and again, I'm not going to take a lot of time on this. I would normally go into the trees up here and do the house and all that stuff, but we're just going to do the rocks a little bit here, and to give you the idea of the effect. The good thing about this too is, with this effect, if I want to do the dodge and burn on the same rock and not, kind of go up as I'm doing it, all I have to do is hit the X to change it to black, and I can just keep going. So for example, down here, I just hit the X and I come in here and I can start putting in the burn, and come in here, and that way I can see my effect. And if I need more dodging, I can go ahead and just hit X and do the dodging right there, and I don't have to worry about it. And you can do that with the other techniques as well. You just have to you just can't do it with pressing a key. You have to go and actually change layers, or change your, in the history state, or the history brush, change it from multiply to screen, or vice versa. So now I'm just coming in here with the painting black to add some shadows in these areas. And I really like this because it's a little bit faster, and it does a great job, and it's not going to change the colors to give you kind of a muddied image, so it works really well. I'll come up here and add a little bit of shadows in here. So again, I would be a lot more meticulous if I were doing this other than in a video. So anyway, that pretty much does it. And if you look over here, you can see the adjustments that we made on the layer. And by the way, I would change that to say dodge and burn. You never want to leave a label that says layer. If you do, you forget what's what, and then you don't know how to make changes. But if I turn this off, turn it back on, look at the big difference, especially this rock down here in the middle, in the front that I worked on, and the big black rock here. So you can see some big effects here by doing dodging and burning, and it just bugs me. Okay, so those are the three methods I wanted to show you. The biggest thing is get into dodging and burning. If you like your image, you don't think you need to dodge and burn, then that's fine. This is just another tool in the toolbox to help you make some of your images pop. Excuse me. Some people refer to this as light painting, or painting on the image. You can refer to it however you want to, but it's a good way to go in and make some adjustments to make your image pop. So that's it. Thanks for joining me, and we'll talk to you some other time. Oh, and by the way, these images will be in the on my Google Drive, which you can download. They'll be under a folder called Dodge and Burn. So feel welcome to go in and download them and work on them at your leisure. Thanks a lot. We will talk to you next time.